Welcome back, everybody, to a Little Less Fear podcast. Today, I'd like to introduce Dan Defigio. He's a well-known nutrition expert who has been featured on CNN's Fit Nation, The Dr. Phil Show, Self Magazine, Reader's Digest, Weight Watchers, Shape Magazine, and a host of other media outlets. Dan is the author of Beating Sugar Addiction for Dummies and the founder of BeatingSugarAddiction.com. Welcome to a Little Less Fear podcast, Dan.
I am so happy to be here. Thanks for asking me to come on your show, Leo.
Absolutely. So, hey, this sounds like you're loaded with incredible information. But before we get there, I'd like to know what brought you to this journey.
Well, I've been in the wellness field for coming up on 30 years now.
Oh, wow.
And when I first, I'm like 117 years old.
Yeah.
I've been at this for a while. When I first started in wellness, I was doing fitness coaching and nutrition coaching, and I assumed that just teaching people how to eat and teaching people how to exercise was going to be, what this was all about.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what became apparent to me very early on is that emotional eating and reactive eating and sugar cravings and comfort food and all this stuff is really a problem for a lot of people. So I started working with that, combination of my own work and work with clients. And I started to get some, programs and some habits and patterns around defeating emotional eating. And then one day out of the blue, I publish a lot. So I was a writer. I was sort of an early internet adopter. I started in this field before there was really an internet. So that should tell you how long I've been at it. So I was publishing articles on the internet and writing things for magazines and things like that. And out of the blue one day, the people who published the Dummies books, Wiley is the name of the company, they just called me up out of the blue one day and they said, "We love your stuff and we would like you to do a book for us." So we batted around a couple ideas, and Beating Sugar Addiction for Dummies was born. So that sort of slapped a label on what I was doing with folks over all this time.
And how did you actually hone in on focusing on specifically on emotional eating?
Wow. I mean, that's a really big question, and it's perfect for your podcast, actually, because the theme of what you're doing here, I mean, I love a little less fear concept.
Great.
Really good. And in fact, I got to give you props. I'm going to interrupt what we're talking about to just give you props. I do a lot of interviews, and this is a very good show.
Oh, wow. Thanks, Dan.
You've got some great guests, and the material that I've heard so far is just out of this world. So you're doing a really fantastic job and a great service to a lot of people. So please keep it up.
Thank you so much. It really helps to hear this. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sure thing. So let's take a 30,000-foot view on emotional eating.
Yes.
We all do some version of escapism.
Mm-hmm.
And it just so happens that most of what I talk about and the stuff I deal with folks has to do with food and food behavior, but it's bigger than that. Emotional eating is a kind of reactive behavior, and it generally arises from one of two triggers. So if you're taking notes, folks, listening to this, write this down.
Yeah.
Thing number one is we end up using food as a substitute for something that we are craving emotionally.
Right.
So if you are feeling lonely or anxious or depressed, let's go with loneliness. What you really want is a feeling of connection. If you're feeling anxious, what you probably want is some feeling of being in control or reassurance.
Yes.
Food cannot give you that, but we pretend it can. So if you are, I use this example all the time in some of my teachings, because a very common scenario I hear from people pretty much every day is they're at work, they're stressed out, they're overwhelmed, they're having a terrible day, their boss is breathing down their neck, they got a deadline they can't meet, they feel like crap, the kid's sick, they got all this stuff on their plate. And so stress eating starts. They reach for the donuts, they reach for the cookies. And the reason this happens is because what you're actually seeking in that moment is some feeling of peacefulness or being in control. And we have made up in our minds this habit that, oh, if I eat the donut, then I will be peaceful and I will have control. And obviously that's not the case.
Right.
But we do it enough times that it just becomes a habit. And so here's your first homework if you find yourself being a reactive eater like this. As soon as you have that urge to reach for something that you know is no good for you, that is your red flag. That is your cue to pause for just a moment and check in with yourself and say, okay, what do I really want right now? Because what you really want is not junk food. What you really want is something emotional. And all it takes, Lino, is literally 1 or 2 seconds of pausing, because that breaks, well, you know all about neurology and
Yeah.
the limbic system and all this kind of stuff. So basically we have these wirings that we have built in our brains,
Right.
where I have a trigger and then I just jump to this behavior. And that's
Right.
just a learned behavior. And what we're trying to do here to get around that is break that cycle and that habit. And all we have to do is pause for literally 1 or 2 seconds and you've broken the cycle. So now when you say, oh, I want to eat the donut, that means I have to pause for 1 second, check in with myself. What do I actually want right now? And you don't have to know the answer. That's the beauty of it. You don't
Right.
have to know what you actually want. You just have to pause for 1 or 2 seconds and you've broken that habit. You've broken the cycle. And now you're in your grown-up brain, your prefrontal cortex, and you can start making decisions instead of just being reactive and fearful.
So when you pause for those 1 or 2 seconds, do you usually recommend to take a deep breath, or do you just literally just stop yourself in those tracks so that you know that you're about to go down a rabbit hole?
Just, yep. All the main thing is pause. If you're slick about it and you want to start doing a little emotional check-in and inventory and sort of see what's going on with yourself, or if you want to do a little breathing practice, drink some water or stand up and walk around for 10 seconds, it doesn't matter what you do as long as you pause, because that's what breaks the cycle. That's the primary thing.
And how, I mean, when you're talking to clients or when you're talking to people about this, how soon do they start to see these changes when they start practicing these pauses?
It is a process.
Okay.
And I'm glad you asked that question, because here's how people tend to think unless they learn otherwise.
Yeah.
Okay, I got this new thing I'm going to do, and they'll do it a few times successfully, and then one time they don't, and then their brain blows up, because that's when the shame and the self-esteem problems and the I'm a failure and I can't do this and here I go again kind of thing. What's wrong with me is the phrase I hear all the time. Why can't I do this? And I will remind you that you just did it 3 or 4 times. So you can do this.
True.
And it's a process. It's a practice. That's why we call it a practice. You do it as much as you can, whenever you can. And sometimes you won't. And that's okay.
And this also, I mean, because I guess your book is Beating Sugar Addiction. I'm assuming this also has to do with sugar addiction.
Absolutely. Sugar addiction is a kind of emotional eating. It looks a certain way, but emotional reactivity can manifest itself with any kind of substance or any kind of activity.
Right.
When we go through these processes and we have these triggers, sometimes we use food, sometimes we use alcohol, sometimes we use drugs, sometimes we use online shopping, sex, gambling, like whatever your thing is.
Yeah.
That's the tool. And that leads into sort of bucket number 2 of emotional eating and stress eating. And that is, so you got your notebooks out now, folks. So we've done number 1, which is the
food as substitute for,
Right. And number 2 is a little bit easier to deal with, actually, because it is a simple distraction. We as humans go through an amazing array of emotions throughout every day.
Oh, yeah.
And some of them don't feel very good.
Right.
So when we are feeling bad, when we're feeling anxious or lonely or angry or fearful or whatever the unpleasant emotion is, until we learn how to be okay with that, our limbic system is like, oh man, this is scary. I don't like this. We got to do something else. And so it will do pretty much anything
Then
to
to feel
avoid
what the
feeling
current
bad.
situation is happening.
And so going through a box of cookies gives you something else to think about.
Wow. Yeah.
The bad news about that is it's temporary, obviously. So yes, you got a 2-minute break, but now you still have the original problem, and you got 4,000 calories worth of cookies in you that you didn't have 2 minutes ago.
Wow.
And we pile on the guilt and the shame and the self-deprecation and all that kind of stuff about what we just did. So the distraction problem can lead to a lot of psychological self-beat up.
Yes.
Because until we learn to do something different, we're going to continue to run away from these uncomfortable feelings. And what you see a lot in addiction therapy is people just jump from one substance to another. Fine, I quit drinking, but now I smoke cigarettes. I quit cigarettes, but now I'm eating weed. So I quit doing drugs, but I'm zoning out on Netflix for 6 hours a day, and I'm not really present. So it's like we just jump from thing to thing to thing until we do our own work in becoming more emotionally healthy and present and capable of being in that space that isn't very pleasant.
How do you help people get in to stay in the moment, and be present, and to be happy in the present moment?
That is a beautiful question and a lifelong practice. So if I had a 30-second answer for that, you and I would both have our own. So what I start with people, because these are big concepts, and like I said, these are lifelong practices, lifelong learnings. We're never really there. We never really get it 100%, but we do the best we can. And when I work with clients, I primarily start with simple behaviors and simple substitutions. So let's go back to the distraction thing we were just talking about.
Yes.
If your habit has been to eat anytime you need a distraction, anytime you need a break, then let's expand that toolbox. Right now, you only got one thing in your toolbox, and it's food. So let's come up with 4 or 5 other things that you enjoy doing that aren't food. Maybe you like to read. Maybe you like to, connect with a friend on Facebook or text message. Maybe you like to take a walk. Whatever it is you like to do, make a list of things that you enjoy doing that can be a healthier distraction. So now instead of one thing, you got 5 things in your toolbox, and you can start picking.
I like that.
Even if you only have one other thing in your toolbox besides food, and you use it every other time, you've already cut your stress eating in half.
That's true.
So that's a win right there.
Hey, Dan, do you see that? What part of the world are you? Where are you at?
I am in the United States. I live in Nashville, Tennessee.
So my question, I'm also in the US. I was wondering if you had explored other countries to see if they have the similar emotional eating and sugar addiction, or is that something that just happens more prevalent here in the US?
It's definitely more present in Western society.
Okay,
because
that's what I felt it was. Yeah.
Couple things. Number one, just the readily available food supply and the readily available junk food supply. Sugar is ubiquitous. You can get junk food anywhere, and it's cheap, and it's socially acceptable. If you have a sugar problem, no one looks at you funny.
True.
Like if you go to a party and you got you're a heroin addict and you start sticking a needle in your arm, there's a social stigma attached to that.
Yeah, but if you're eating cookies and caramel chews,
exactly. If you use food as your thing, then there's no social stigma, so it's acceptable. And lastly, it's difficult with food because we have to eat. You can quit alcohol cold turkey. You can quit drugs cold turkey. You can quit gambling cold turkey.
Yeah, but eating,
we have to eat food no matter what. So that adds a level of difficulty to it also.
What about the additives, the artificial ingredients and all the additives here in the US in the food? And and snacks and sweets, does that make the addiction worse?
It
Is
really
it?
does. We've got two, when we talk about sugar addiction, or food addiction in general, we've got two problems that are really intertwined. Number
Mhm.
one is we have the emotional technique that we're using as, uh, we're using food as a substitute or as a distraction. So we have
Mhm.
substance abuse as a
Yeah.
concept. And then, junk food is manufactured to be addictive. Sugar and salt and fat and all these chemical flavor enhancers and enhance what we call mouth feel, like what it feels like in your mouth and stuff like this. I
Yeah.
mean, these companies put a lot of money in research and development to make this as sensory addictive as possible because they want you
Yikes.
to buy their stuff and eat their
Yeah.
stuff. So we get physiological addictive behaviors in addition to the emotional addictive behaviors from sugar. We get that dopamine hit from
Yeah.
sugar. There's been some interesting research that shows that that strong dopamine attraction is just as strong as it is with like cocaine. It's the
Whoa.
same pathway and the same mechanism in our bodies.
And this is with
So,
the artificial sugars, though, right? Not
well,
with
it's just sugar in general.
oh, sugar in general.
Yeah. So the artificial sweeteners that you're talking about, yeah, that adds to our what we call hyper palatable sense. The extra sweet taste that
Yeah.
we are seeking, and the research on a lot of the chemical sweeteners has shown us that it starts to disrupt the hormones in our bodies that regulate appetite.
Oh, wow.
So one of the things that we've got a couple hormones floating around in us that do a pretty good job of sensing like how much we've eaten, are we still hungry, how full are our fat cells that we store.
Hmm.
And some of the research on the artificial sweeteners shows that those chemicals disrupt those hormone signals. So we literally don't get the signal that we've had enough to eat, for example, or we're full. So
My goodness. And if your hormones are being interrupted, that also means that your sleep hormones are being interrupted, which means you're not going to be sleeping well and it's going to start messing with your whole metabolism. Oh, my goodness. What a domino effect that is.
yeah, it really is. And you're
Wow.
absolutely right. A lack of sleep triggers the hunger hormones, and we can make up with food a bad sleep for a day or two, and that's all. After that, we start to have some very bad side effects neurologically from not sleeping. But that's you know all about that.
Hey, Dan, you're really knowledgeable in this. What got you so passionate in this topic?
Lino, I'm a nerd at heart, and I think everything is interesting pretty much.
Okay.
So when I start getting into a topic and I start learning about it, I enjoy the process of learning about it.
Excellent.
So whatever I get into, plus I've been in this field for 30 years, so I should have learned something by now. I
Sure.
would hope.
Hey, what about with the I'm sure you've probably explored this with your clients, because I guess you can say that I used to have a pretty bad sugar addiction. And what got me to stop the sugar addiction, I mean, it took at least 3 years to get to where I'm at now, from the time that I recognized that I quote unquote needed something sweet. That used to be my thing. I need to have something sweet every day. No, I didn't, but I thought I did.
Right.
And so I mean, I would have bad stuff like caramellos and Snicker bars and it was just bad. But what I started doing is I went organic, and once I went organic, I started substituting those bad chocolate bars with like yogurts mixed with berries and nuts, and that still had the sugar, and I didn't go through that terrible crash or depression that a lot of people go through whenever they stop, cold turkey or however they stop these sugar addictions. And I was able to kind of just integrate into this new world of sweets organically. And now I rarely have any of those artificial sugars at all. I mean, if I crave something sweet, it's going to be yogurt with berries and maybe some I don't know, some once in a while maybe I'll sprinkle caramel on top, but very rarely. And have you tried that with any of your clients as far as like maybe, okay, fine, like, if you feel you can't stop the sweets, how about switching to healthy sweets, going from unhealthy to healthy sweets and seeing if that regulates anything?
Yes, it does. That is actually a big tool that I use.
Oh,
The
great.
concept of upgrading
Oh, I
instead of
like that.
instead of trying to
Upgrading your
stop.
sweets.
Yeah, exactly.
That's hilarious. Upgrade
So
your
when
sweets.
people try to, I'm glad you brought this up because this is a big sort of philosophical piece of my teaching and my coaching
Yeah.
practice. When people try to stop doing something and just quit cold turkey,
Mhm.
not very many people can do that very well. It doesn't work well
Right.
because it's based on willpower and denying yourself things. And that only lasts so long. As
Yeah.
everyone who's ever had a New Year's resolution can attest to, willpower only lasts a short period of time.
Yeah.
And you're back in your old habits.
Right.
So what I coach people to try to do instead, I never ask anybody to quit sugar. What I ask them to do is, all right, first of all, what I usually do is I start with a basic food journal. Like for 2 or 3 days, let's record everything that you eat so we can see what's actually happening. Because when it comes to helping people, what we're looking for is progress. And what so many people do, and so many like online programs do and stuff like that. People come to me all the time and say, I just need a plan. And I say, no, you don't. And they say, well, what are you talking about? So the reason that you don't want a plan is because if you have, let's say you are a person who was just like you described, you pretty much you have gotten in a habit of eating sugar every day after dinner.
And that was me. That was me for like 20 years.
I hear it every day. And sometimes during the day too. And you also, when you're feeling stressed or emotional or whatever, or when you didn't plan right and you'll swing by and you grab something, an ice cream instead of lunch that you brought, or these kinds of things. So you got all this going on and somebody's going to tell you, okay, you're eating too much sugar, so you have to quit sugar. And here's the new plan that you're going to do. And they hand you the plan. Now, it may be a good plan, right? Healthy foods, good organic mixes of vegetables and proteins and all that kind of stuff, which is great. But we're not talking about the plan and the knowledge of how to eat here. We're talking about behavior. And you can't go from what we just described, having sugar multiple times a day, every day, to none of it, and here's the perfect plan.
Right.
You could do that, for a week, maybe 2, and then you're going to stop doing it. Yeah. And then you go back to what you used to do. So you haven't really changed anything. One of the big themes in my Beating Sugar Addiction for Dummies book is whatever you do most of the time, that's what you get. So if you don't like what you're getting, you have to change what you usually do. You have to change what is normal for you. Mm-hmm. So handing somebody a meal plan that is radically different from what they usually do is never going to help them, because they're going to do it until they don't do it. And then they go back to what they used to do, and you have changed nothing. Mm-hmm. So just like you had suggested for what you did for yourself, what we do is we start to, look at what is happening right now and how can we make this a little bit better? How can we improve, the things that you're eating that are not great for you? How can we upgrade those so you still get your sweet fix or your creamy fix? Like I like ice cream personally. That's my
job. Me too. I love it.
So a good substitute is the yogurt that you talked about. Because what I like about the ice cream is the cold, creamy feel. Yeah. So yogurt is cold and creamy. That works great. It's a much better upgrade than just eating ice cream. Of course, when I do eat ice cream, I do it on purpose. It's not reactively. I'm not doing it out of emotional reactivity. Sure. I'm saying I'm going to eat some ice cream because I want some. I like it. And then I go get some and I eat it and I enjoy it. And then that's that until whenever the next time is.
That's awesome, Dan.
Well, that's the goal, is to be able to have smart, sensible, healthy nutrition most of the time. And then when you have your treats, they're intentional. They are not every day or at a frequency that is harmful to you. And you enjoy it when you do it. There's no guilt. There's no shame. There's no, oh, I wish I wouldn't have done that kind of thing. Because
I like how you said that, intentional treats, because then you're not really being, you're not being so spontaneous and so like, I gotta have this and I gotta have it now. You're actually,
yeah, it's not
about
reactive.
it.
And
Yeah.
that is the
Reactive,
big,
exactly.
if you had to describe my coaching practice in a sentence, that would be it. The phrase is intentionality versus reactivity.
I love
That's
it.
what I'm trying to help people achieve.
That's
So
excellent.
yeah, people get in, and we all do it, and we all do it in a variety of different ways. And like I said earlier, it just so happens that we're talking about food and stress eating and emotional eating and sugar addiction, but it happens in lots and lots of different ways in our lives where we just do things reactively.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talked earlier about being present and being in the moment,
Yes.
you know, what we're really trying to do here is to be more intentional all the time.
Yes.
Yeah. That's the real goal. So if someone comes to me with a history of, near 100% reactive eating, if we can work for a while and get the reactivity down to 50% or less than 50%, and get the rest of it, that other 50%, as intentional, I mean, are they still emotionally eating? Yeah, sometimes. But look at the long-term effect on what they're doing for their health and their bodies. If you go from 0 to 50% healthy food, that's a huge upgrade.
Oh yeah,
that's
absolutely.
A big win. If you go from 100% junk food down to 50% junk food, that's a big reduction. And in addiction therapy, we call that harm reduction.
I like it.
If you are drinking yourself silly into unconsciousness 7 days a week, and you only do that 4 days a week, that's a win.
That's true.
It's an upgrade because you're hurting.
That is an upgrade.
Yeah. So that is the process. We take what is good and try to make it better. We take what is harmful and try to make it less harmful and less often. And along the way, we work to try to understand why all this is happening. And that's where the real personal work comes in, because until you understand what your reactivity is about and what you're really seeking from an emotional standpoint, the techniques are just tools and band-aids. And that reactivity and that emotional upset is going to show up somewhere else. You might get your food together, but it's going to show up somewhere else until you get your, if I may.
It'll keep presenting itself until you work on that.
Unless you get your, if I may, emotional shit together,
Yeah.
it's going to show up somewhere.
Absolutely. Hey, Dan, could you tell us a success story of a client that you have had in the past that was actually really challenging and was able to beat their either food, emotional eating, or their sugar addiction?
I have a long list of folks who have done exactly what we just described, going from a complete train wreck to pretty good most of the time. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make for a great, inspiring Hallmark story. Okay. Because the process isn't real sexy, and it isn't that emotionally moving from a story standpoint. Mm-hmm. But when I get people who will tell me in tears someday how different things are for them, and when they realize how far they have come and how much better they feel and how much more in control of their lives they are and how much more hope they have for their future. I mean, that's the most gratifying work that one can do. When you are being someone's anchor and helping to guide them from reactive train wreck to someone who finally feels like they're in control of their own world. I mean, what else can you ask for? Right. That is That is what this is all about. And that's why I keep doing this. I've been at it for a long time. And it's those kinds of stories and those kinds of results that just keep me going.
Yeah, it really is life changing. I mean, if someone really definitely has a really bad issue with, I mean, this stuff can depress people and put them in, keep them deep in a hole and in a pit and even embarrassing. I mean, all kinds of stuff. And you're helping them come out of that. That's incredible, Dan.
It is an honor to be able to do this kind of work.
So Dan, thanks so much for being a Little Less Fear podcast. How can our viewers, our watchers, and our listeners find you? And where can we find information on your program?
If you are interested in hearing more from Dan Defigio, A, congratulations, that is a very smart decision. And B, you can just go to beatingsugaraddiction.com. That's sort of headquarters for me. And from there, I've got, since we're talking about stress eating, I've got some free guidebooks on how to stop stress eating and how to kill sugar cravings and stuff like that. So that would be a good first place to start. Just go to beatingsugaraddiction.com, pick up the free stuff, do a little reading, and get on the email list. So, because I put out multiple times per week an email that talks about, mindset and techniques for emotional eating and all this kind of stuff we're talking about today. I talk on a regular basis. I type in a regular basis by email about that. So I get a lot of nice feedback from the email stuff too, which is nice.
This has been a really pleasant conversation. I'm really grateful that we've crossed paths. Actually, I have a lot of people in my life that I really do feel are emotionally eating and have sugar addiction. I used to be one myself. But I mean, thank you so much for your incredible information, and I hope we keep in touch.
It is my pleasure, and you, sir, are doing great work. So please keep.
So are you. Takes one to know one.
Keep up the great work on A Little Less Fear podcast. Woo!
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. Have a great day.